Hey guys, so this is Paul Skrillo again with another Geek E interview, and we're here with Sketch as well,
What's up?
and we're here with Greg. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we had a couple questions for you, and I think the best question to start off with is, how did you get your start in the business?
So I was 19, sophomore in college, and Marvel Comics announced a new talent search, and I just figured they'd be absolutely swamped. And I also figured that if Marvel was announcing a new talent search, that DC would follow shortly thereafter. So instead of preparing submissions for Marvel, I prepared submissions for DC, and I was right. Later, I was on staff at DC, and I found the old logbook, and I was literally the second person to send in submissions because I guessed right. And there's a lot more to the story than that, but basically I had a meeting with Dick Giordano, who at the time was executive editor at DC Comics, and I got a bit of freelance work, not a lot published, nearly nothing published. But Dick offered me a job as a editorial assistant, which is sort of a glorified term for Xerox boy. So I started work there, got promoted to assistant editor and then associate editor. Started writing with a partner, Carrie Bates. We wrote one episode of Gem and the Holograms, which was my first TV credit. Thought it would lead to big things, led to absolutely nothing, not even a second gem, so that may tell you the quality of the episode. Or not of the episode, but of the script. I left DC to go to graduate school at USC in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from. And while I was there, I interviewed at Walt Disney Television Animation. They gave me a job as a junior executive, really junior. My title was staff assistant. But I had been there 4 days when my immediate boss, a guy named Bruce Cranston, had to take a 2-week business trip to Europe that lasted for 6 months. And so with 4 days training, I became the entire development department. So I trained myself. I literally studied the business under Gary Kreisel, development under Tad Stones, the whole animation process from start to finish under Alan Zasloff. Those three guys really took me under their wing. I made sure I knew everything I could learn about the process of animation, from developing a show to selling a show to the writing process, pre-production, production, and post-production. And I did okay. And when Bruce came back after 6 months, some guys could have been jerks and said, oh, this kid makes me nervous. He's proven he can do the job. But instead, Bruce's response was, hey, this kid's proven he can do the job. Let's promote him. So I eventually became director of series development there, developed a whole bunch of shows, and including Goof Troop and Bonkers and all sorts of stuff, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, not the movies, the TV versions, of course. And then I developed a show called Gargoyles, created and developed that show. It took us 2 years to sell it. By the time we sold it, I was so in love with that show that I'm like, well, I want to do this show. Usually I develop a show, find a producer, and then sort of nudge it out the door and go, good luck, But on Gargoyles, I wanted to do it myself, so I moved over to produce Gargoyles and sort of switched sides of the desk, and the rest is sort of history. Not necessarily good history, but history.
So piggybacking off of that, Gargoyles was probably one of the most successful shows that you had. I wanted to know, how did you come up with the concept for the show, and was there any cartoons out there that inspired the show as well?
Sure. The main inspiration for Gargoyles was Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears. Gummy Bears was a show I worked on a little at the tail end, but it was created and developed by a guy named Jim Magon, really talented guy. And Gummy Bears was a show that had this wonderful medieval backstory, and we just felt it didn't get a lot of respect. There was a lot of confusion in the marketplace between Gummy Bears and Care Bears. And Gummy Bears was this comedy show, but adventure and mythology and all this great stuff. And Care Bears was this sort of saccharine sweet show about hugs. But they both had multicolored bears in them. And their show was sort of saccharine sweet, but our show was the one that was named after a candy. So we consciously set out with Gargoyles initially to create a show like Gummy Bears, but one that we thought would garner more respect, attention, etc. So the two major changes we made were we decided that it would have this great medieval backstory, but we would set it in the present, make it very contemporary. So the Gargoyles were cursed with a spell for 1,000 years, and they wake up in modern-day Manhattan. The second change was obvious. Instead of cute little multicolored bears, we had cute little multicolored gargoyles. And we took that show to Michael Eisner, who was at the time the chairman of the Walt Disney Company, and tried to sell it to him, and he passed. But my bosses and I, we really thought, there's something in this show. So we went back to the drawing board a second time. And Tad Stones, the creator of Darkwing Duck, as a favor, sort of took a look at it and gave us some feedback. And his feedback was, well, you've got all these cute little gargoyles. What if you had one big gargoyle? Because we had the human female character, the character that became Elisa in the show. But, and we had versions of Hudson and Xanatos and Brooklyn and Lexington, Broadway, Owen, Demona, all those characters. But there was no version of Goliath in the comedy development. And he was like, why don't you have one big gargoyle? Do a Beauty and the Beast thing with Goliath and Elisa. We didn't have the names yet, but, with the big gargoyle and the human female, do Beauty and the Beast. And that really, rang a bell in my head. I'd been doing these, funny cartoons for 3 or 4 years at Disney, but prior to that, my background was superheroes at DC Comics, and I'd written Captain Atom for years, and so suddenly that clicked for me. We created Goliath, and then we took the whole comedy show and sort of put it through the prism of Goliath, and came out the other end with the show that you guys know. Action drama, still with a lot of humor in it, but romance and sci-fi and mystery and all that stuff that was in the show. And we came up with the pack and the mutates and all this stuff. And we put this pitch together with all this great ideas, and we pitched it to Michael Eisner, and he passed. But still, my bosses were like, we think there's something here, go to the drawing board again. So we went back to the drawing board a third time, and we said, what do we need to change about this show? And we decided nothing. The show's great. The show's not the problem is the pitch. So we cut the pitch way down. It had been this huge pitch with everything in the kitchen sink. All these great ideas like the pack, like the mutates, things that we did end up putting in the show. But we were distracting in the pitch. So we cut the pitch down to being about the Beauty and the Beast idea. We pitched that to Michael Eisner 2 years after we had started, and this time he bought it. And we made the show. So Gummy Bears was a big inspiration for me. I'd always been fascinated with gargoyles. I'd gone on a high school trip to Europe, one of those 8 countries in 5 weeks kind of trip. And I took photographs of gargoyles, collected postcards of gargoyles, just because they interested me. So that was kind of the initial inspiration for doing that. And the other big inspiration was Hill Street Blues, which was the idea of a big ensemble show with one central character. In Hill Street, it was Captain Frank Furillo. In Gargoyles, it was Goliath. And then we had this sort of concentric circles of supporting cast that surrounded Goliath and gave us this really rich, big ensemble.
And one other question about Gargoyles. Did you think it was going to be as successful as it was? And do you ever foresee that having a reboot in the future?
I don't know if I thought like 20 years out we'd still be talking about it. But I was very aware at the time that it was something special. And I was even aware, as young as I was just 30, thinking I'm never going to have anything like this again. An original idea of mine that is so primal, is so archetypal. I didn't think, even then I knew, and I hoped I was wrong, but the truth is I wasn't wrong. That was something truly special. As for reboots, I'm not big on rebooting a property that I don't think needs a reboot, but I'd like to continue it. We did 2 seasons of Gargoyles. They did a 3rd season without me that we don't count so much. So we sort of did the official 3rd season as comic books. We did 18 issues, and I'd love to go back and do more comics or do more animated series. I'm constantly talking to Disney, I don't mean constantly, but intermittently on an ongoing basis, talking to Disney about bringing it back in one form or another, and discussions about a live-action movie are ongoing. I've got nothing to report. I wish I could say, hey, right here's the scoop for you guys, but I don't have. There's no deal. There's no news, but I haven't given up. The fans haven't given up on it, so I haven't given up on it either.
Awesome. Well, Sketch has got a couple questions, so I'll let him ask them.
Yeah. Now, my favorite work that you've done is the Spectacular Spider-Man animated series. I consider it the best Spider-Man animated for sure, and definitely one of the best interpretations of Spider-Man overall. Now, first of all, I thought it was very interesting that Gargoyles started as a comedy. That would be interesting to see. Because you worked at DC and then you worked at Disney, so what led you to the path to develop a Spider-Man series for Sony?
Well, they hired me. But, when I was a kid, a little kid, I just loved superheroes. In fact, when I was really little, I didn't even get that there was a DC and a Marvel. I might see Batman team up with Green Lantern in one comic book that I picked up, and in another I'd see Captain America teaming up with Thor. It didn't occur to me that I might not see Batman and Captain America team up next month. It took me a while, probably, I don't know, I'm a little dense. It took me a little while before I even made the distinction. Oh, I see, these heroes belong to this company and these heroes belong to this company, and they're not going to get to mix, which I thought was tragic. And when I was a teenager and they finally came out with that one Superman Spider-Man issue, I was thrilled. So I didn't grow up a DC fan or a Marvel fan. I grew up a fan of both. I started work at DC for the reasons I laid out earlier. Marvel announced first, and I just assumed, and I was not wrong, that they would be flooded with submissions. DC was flooded too, but because I thought ahead, I was in there early. So I'd always been a huge Spider-Man fan. I love Spider-Man. So they were looking for a showrunner for Spider-Man, and I was one of the people they talked to. This was in February, and then I didn't hear anything. And so, you get to December and you feel, well, I guess someone else got the job, And then in December, I was at a Christmas party at a friend's house, and some guy came up to me and congratulated me on getting the Spider-Man gig. And I was like, no, I didn't get that. I interviewed for it, but that was back in February. I'm pretty sure they went with someone else. And they're like, guy's like, no, this was on a Saturday night. He's like, no, yesterday I heard that you got it. I'm like, what? And my agent was actually at that party, and I said, do you know anything about this? He's like, no, I haven't heard anything. So on Monday, suddenly I'm getting calls from everybody, and I went in and talked to Sony, and I went in and talked to Marvel, and I had to give my pitch all over again. I had to remember it because it was 10 months ago. And then they're like, you've got the job. So I actually was on a family vacation. I went out and I bought all those, phone book size essential Spider-Mans, and I'd read all that stuff before, but I had to crash course on it, took all sorts of notes, and by the time I got back in January from this vacation, I had the whole first season laid out. You know, like I said, I just am a huge Spider-Man fan, and so for me, it's about Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita Sr. And then we weren't shy. We borrowed stuff from the movies. We borrowed stuff from Untold Tales of Spider-Man, from the more current Spider-Man, from Venom from the 90s. We weren't shy. If it was a good idea, we'd grab it. But the core for us was those Lee Ditko and Lee Romita years. To me, that's Spider-Man, and so that's what we tried to bring to the table. And then the only other thing we tried to do is, we decided any character that was worth naming, as opposed to just, background characters like, hey, there are a couple subway riders on the platform with Peter and Gwen or something like that. We decided any named character we were going to find from the Spider-Man continuity, no matter how obscure. So the football coach is Coach Smith, and that sounds like a generic name. Maybe it is, but it's a generic name Stan Lee came up with. It's not a generic name I came up with. So the high school teacher, the college teacher, all these characters we got from the continuity somewhere. And that, because the continuity was so rich, we figured we don't need to create any original characters for this show.
Jumping off of that, I am told that your series Bibles are ridiculously huge. And why don't you tell us about your process of building a series Bible?
Well, usually there are two Bibles. They're the Writer's Bible, which are seriously huge, ridiculous, but have a lot of detail, a lot of thought put into them. Usually we do a shorter Bible for executives who don't want to get bogged down in all the detail, but just want the basic overview of it. I have occasionally made the mistake of showing the executives the big, long one, and they kind of get nervous. The process for me is about a really large bulletin board and a lot of index cards. It's very low tech. Sharpies, push pins, index cards, bulletin board. And we just start every little idea, whether it's line of dialogue or a scene or a character, or we put a card up on the board for that. And then we just start putting the cards in order. So I'll build, with help, not by myself, but I'll build an entire season at a time. So, for example, on Spectacular Spider-Man, my producing partner on that show is Vic Cook. So it's me and Vic, and our staff writer was Kevin Hops, and the three of us built this wall that had the whole story there. On Young Justice, for example, my partner was Brandon Vietti. But again, our staff writer was Kevin Hops. So it was me, Kevin, and Brandon building this whole wall. In that case, the first season was 26 episodes. Spider-Man, the first season was 13. But we build a whole season at a time because, the way most of my shows go, and this goes back to Gargoyles even, is, it's a tapestry. We're weaving threads in and out of episodes. Each episode has to stand alone, tell its own story, beginning, middle, and end, but we'll plant seeds for things down the road. So, for example, the pilot to Spectacular Spider-Man introduces nearly every villain you're going to meet in the first season, though most of them aren't supervillains yet. A couple of them, Flint and Alex, they're just thugs. And Otto, he's just a nebbishy scientist. And Norman Osborn is just this ruthless, but still, fairly normal-seeming guy. And all those characters appear in the first episode of Spider-Man. I think I'm forgetting. Oh, Eddie Brock is in the first episode of Spectacular Spider-Man. We had long-term plans, and because we planned out the entire season before we wrote even one script, you're able to capitalize on those plans.
Do you have another question?
Yeah. This regards casting, because I love that you throw in Star Trek actors in a lot of your shows. And I was wondering if you take any part in the casting process or if you hand that off to somebody else.
Well, most of my shows, I'm not the casting director, but I definitely take part in the process. The producers always do. I mean, you talked about the Star Trek actors. That was pretty straightforward. That goes back to Gargoyles. Marina Sirtis auditioned for Elisa. We didn't think she was right for Elisa, but we thought she'd be good for Demona, so we brought her back to read for Demona. She was literally the first person to read to Demona and nailed it. We had a bunch of other women to listen to, but we were like, well, all right, we'll keep an open mind, but it seems like it's Marina. And I think for Marina, at the time she was doing Star Trek The Next Generation, literally playing the nicest woman in the universe. So I think playing Demona for her was a lot of fun. Maybe a little closer to her true personality than... Jonathan Frakes auditioned for Xanatos, and he was great, and we cast him. And it wasn't like a plan initially to cast Star Trek actors. It's just they auditioned, and they were really good. But then down the road, as episodes, you're casting guest stars. And just as an example, we'd be in the recording studio, recording an episode, and then, we'd take a break, and during the break, Jamie Thomason, our voice director, would turn to us and say, okay, so for next week, what are we going to need? And we're like, well, we're introducing Goliath's brother, Coldstone. So we need a guy who's got deep chops like Keith David has, who plays Goliath. So we want a big sound and deep chops, and who could play Goliath's brother? And, you look through the glass and you see Marina and Jonathan sitting there, and I'm like, well, what about Michael Dorn? So initially it was just like we had this reminder that there were these great ensemble of actors available to us, and Jonathan Marina would say to those guys, hey, it's a great gig, you should do it. Most of them had not done animation before. So we got Brent Spiner as Puck and LeVar Burton as Anansi, and then at some point it became like, oh, we cast Nichelle Nichols as Elisa's mother, Diane Maza. And then it's sort of like, can we get someone from every one of the Star Trek shows? So we got Avery Brooks and we got Kate Mulgrew. And then at some point you begin to realize there's a publicity value in this. And, I would never cast someone for publicity value at the expense of being right for a role. But hey, if it's gives us a little publicity, that doesn't hurt. And then, I wind up working with these people and thinking they're great. So if I'm on Young Justice and I need someone to play Queen Bee or I need someone to play the Joker, I'm not going to be shy about using people I've used before. I have, in essence, an ensemble of my own that I use over and over again because they're great. And I've always bring in new people into that ensemble. And, there are shows I've done that someone who I love hasn't been right for anything or wasn't available right when we needed them. But I use the same actors over and over again because they're great. I'm very involved in the casting process. And in fact, if I can pimp my stuff for a second, I wrote these two novels, Reign of the Ghosts and Spirits of Ash and Foam. And recently, we're in the process of taking Reign and making a full cast audio play. This isn't just one narrator reading the book out loud. This is an unabridged, full cast production, 20 actors playing 30 roles. Marina Sirtis is in it, Brent Spiner's in it, Ed Asner's in it, Steve Bloom, who plays Zeb on Star Wars Rebels, Vanessa Marshall, who plays Hera on Rebels, Josh Keaton, the Spectacular Spider-Man himself, is in it. Eric Lopez, who played Blue Beetle in Young Justice, and Brighton James, who played Static in Young Justice, are all in this, plus a bunch of other great actors. So I cast that with Curtis Kohler and Jamie Thomason, and I voice directed most of it. And this will have a full score, sound effects. This is basically a 4-hour animated movie with everything except the animation. And that'll be available. We did a Kickstarter, we fully funded, and we're in post-production now on it. And so sometime in September, at the latest early October, we'll be out with this production. So keep an eye out for it. And you can check for updates at reignoftheghost.com. That's Rain, R-A-I-N, reignoftheghost.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Greg_Weisman, or you can also check out my website, AskGregWeisman.com.
And we'll be sure to put that in the video, too, for you, just so that you have that. Actually, piggybacking off of that, even though you're just doing audio and sound effects and everything like that, would you see that as maybe becoming something animated?
I'd be thrilled if Rain was originally developed as an animated series for DreamWorks back in the 90s. It didn't go. We sold it to Nickelodeon, but for all sorts of business reasons, not really creative reasons, it never got made. So I bought it back from DreamWorks to write the novels. So I'd love to do it as an animated series. Frankly, though, I'd love to do it as a live-action movie, too. So we'll have to see. At the moment, no one's buying, but we'll see.
Okay. So, speaking of Young Justice, you were heavily involved with Young Justice, obviously. How did you think it did on Cartoon Network when it was on there?
We were a single, not a double or a triple. I'd love it if we had been a Grand Slam home run, but we just weren't. I'm really proud of the show. We did 46 episodes. We did 27 issues of a companion comic book. We did one video game. I think it all turned out great. I worked with Brandon Vietti, who's the smartest guy I know, bar none. And he can draw and write. It's really annoying. He's so good, so talented. Had, an amazing cast, a great writing staff. I think the show turned out great, but it didn't quite find the numbers from an audience standpoint that we were hoping. And the main problem we ran into is that the toys didn't sell. And the budget for the toys, the money from Mattel, provided our production budget. So when Mattel canceled the toy line, we had no money to make a third season. So we were sort of doomed from that point. And it's more complicated than that, but it's not a lot more complicated than that.
So it's kind of what happened with Thundercats, basically. They didn't sell any toys, and they ended up losing stuff, too.
I can't speak for Thundercats. I don't know what happened there, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay, and one other question about Young Justice. Do you think that series could ever be continued? Because the way that the last episode ended, it kind of had this idea that there might be a continuation as well.
Yeah, we did that on purpose, and we'd love to continue it. If they gave us a shot, Brandon and I would come back in a second to do more episodes or to do a DVD movie or whatever. Chris Jones and I did the comic book together, and we'd love to come back and just do either more issues of the comic book, and we pitched that to DC. We pitched doing Earth 16 that is set in that area, not specifically Young Justice, but set there as well. Hell, we pitched a short, Kari Payton, who played Aqualad, and I pitched comedy shorts, Black Mana's Celebrity Hot Tub, which was really funny, but they were nervous about it, and so they didn't buy it. So,
I think I would have liked to see that. All right, so let's move on to Star Wars Rebels. You were part of that. And one of the questions, and a lot of these questions I've been getting from the internet, so that's why I'm reading them off my phone. You were involved in the first season. Can you tell us about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I was one of 3 executive producers with Dave Filoni and Simon Kinberg. The process was very similar to what I described before. Big bulletin board, lots of index cards. Built the whole season. Phenomenal cast. And it's Star Wars, man. You know what I mean? It's effing great. So
I got to bounce off of that one because your eyes really lit up when you said Star Wars. So Star Wars, Marvel, DC, whatever you worked on. What has been just the most joyous and amazing experience for you?
Gargoyles. I mean, it still goes back to that because that was my baby. I mean, in other words, I love Spider-Man. I love those DC heroes. I love Star Wars. I'm a big geek. look where I'm sitting, you know. But at the end of the day, those were things that belonged to someone else. And Gargoyles belongs to someone else. Disney owns Gargoyles. I don't own Gargoyles. I don't make a cent off it. But I created it. That was my baby. I was the one person on it from the beginning of development all the way through the end of post-production of the series. I wrote all the SLG comic books. I'm the one that's been interacting with the fans on Gargoyles on an ongoing basis for 20 years. So I'm very territorial about it. I mean, I don't deny it. That's my baby, and that's still the best. And let me tell you, I had a great time working on Witch. I had a great time working on Starship Troopers. I had a great time working on shows that never saw the light of day. And a close second would probably be Reign of the Ghosts, because that was such a stretching and such a different muscle for me. Having, usually I'm working in comics like Captain Atom or Star Wars Kanan or Young Justice or Gargoyles, and even on comics I have a collaborator or two, artists, letters, etc. And in animation I have literally hundreds of collaborators on any show I do. When I wrote those books, I was like alone in a room, and it was scary as hell. So that was really gratifying to be able to do those books. But, I'm a guy who looks for collaborators, so as soon as Reign was done, I'm like going, hey, let's make an audio play so I can have other people work on this with me. Composers and actors and engineers and stuff like that. But yeah, if I had to pick just one thing, it would probably be Gargoyles. Professionally. Personally, it would be my kids, so...
Well, we're going to ask one more question because we're getting to the time here. So is there any advice that you could give to people out there that are looking to get into the industry, whether just to write or even to pitch a show that they may have?
Well, my first piece of advice is always, if you could be happy doing anything else, do that other thing. If you want to be a writer, but you don't feel like you need to do it, then, no one's stopping you. Write. Hell, you could write a screenplay or a novel or something, and you might sell it. You never know, but keep the day job. For those people, frankly, like me, who just, I can't imagine doing anything else with my life. I'm frankly not qualified to do anything else with my life. If you have to do it, then learn your craft. So if you want to be a writer, write. If you want to be an artist, draw. If you want to be an actor, act. There's no substitution for actually doing it. Education's great. I'm not only not knocking it, I think it's essential. But if you're in school, you should be writing every day. Don't say, well, once I get out of school, then I'll start writing. You should be writing every day. If you're in school and you want to be an actor, you should be acting every day. There's tons of theater at every college I've ever heard of. You should be acting. You should be auditioning. You should be performing. Then the second rule is go to where the work is. Yeah, you can get a job in animation, in St. Louis, I suppose, but there's not a lot of work there. There's a little bit of work in Atlanta. It's great. There's a little bit more work in New York. There's a little bit of work in Dallas. But I got to tell you, if you want to be in animation, 90% of the work is in Los Angeles. So when are you moving to Los Angeles? And so you got to be where the work is. And then, if you want to be a writer, I advise reading a lot. Read the classics. Don't just read the current stuff that's coming out. Go back and read Homer. Go back and read Shakespeare. Go back and read Dickens or Jane Austen. If you're looking at comic books, the new stuff's fantastic, but you should be going back and reading Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and those guys. If you're interested in writing movies, great. See everything that's current, but oh my God, go back and watch Casablanca. Go back and watch Citizen Kane. Go back and watch some of the movies that made movies what they are. And then write, and proofread. Learn to proofread. I get sample scripts all the time from people. If I see a typo, I'm like, well, everyone makes a mistake. If I see 2 typos, I'm throwing it in the trash. Because if this guy or gal can't take the time to proofread their work, why should I take the time to read it? and I'm one of the nice guys. Most people won't get off the first page if they see even one typo. So learn to proofread. I'm dyslexic a little, so I have trouble with homonyms. So one trick that I've learned for proofreading is I read aloud. My ear will catch things that my eye doesn't. But for homonyms, that won't work with me. So I give, if I'm giving my work to someone that is going to evaluate it, I have my wife look at it first to make sure I'm not leaving mistakes. If you feel like, for whatever reason, you can't proofread your work, find someone who can do it for you. But do not turn it in sloppy.
All right, and where can people find you on the internet? You said your Twitter earlier. Also, are you on Facebook too?
Yeah, I forget about Facebook because I just joined it during the Kickstarter campaign. But yes, I am on Facebook. In fact, I kind of have two pages. I don't really understand Facebook yet, but I think I have like a page and a profile page. Does that make sense? And I'm on Twitter at Greg_Weisman. And then I have a website called AskGregWeisman.com where I've been answering questions for about 18 years. Started off just being about Gargoyles. Now there are these huge archives of answered questions on Spider-Man, Young Justice, everything. And so I'm about a year behind answering questions, honestly. But I get to them eventually. I'm slow, but I get to them eventually. And the odds are, if you've got a question and you go to the archive, it's a searchable archive, the odds are I've answered it already, and you can find the answer there. 95% of the questions I get asked, my response is, dude, check the archive. I answered this already. And then 4% is no spoilers, and then 1% is questions that I actually answered.
All right, well, thank you for taking your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Greg.
It's fun. Thanks a lot, guys.